Hi, it's Jeff with Cribl. In this video, we're joining Randy Corelli as he takes a deep dive into the world of data masking in Cribl Stream. Whether it's PII and simple extracted fields, or complicated patterns and nested ones, Randy's got a technique that will get you where you want to go. Let's join him as he gives an office hour style walkthrough and demonstration.
Good day, everyone. So for today's how-to, I'm going to go through some data masking from an easier event and some basic examples, just run through some options, to a more complicated event format, and just how we might handle that kind of situation here as well. Before I hop into that, I did just want to highlight this docs page. So under the reference section of the docs, Cribl expressions and C.Mask, ton of useful masking functions. So some of them, like this C.mask.cc for masking credit cards, will apply a certain masking function to the value. And here we see a couple of options. The standard one, replacing everything except the last 4 characters, an X. But here we can see we can also get a little creative with the configuration and get some different outputs. Other ones, which also kind of go along with these, are checking to see if the value is of that type. So is it a credit card, or is it a IEMI value, or just one of these kind of LUNs here as well. So some of those super useful, depending on what your use case is. And then creating things like an MD5 or a SHA hash, we can easily do that from the values, or generating a random alphanumeric string, repeating a specific character, or even replacing just a string with the word redacted. So very useful docs page for this topic. And in general, this whole reference section, I highly recommend. I use it all the time. So going through this one, let's take a quick look at our event. So in this case here, we just have a basic KVP, key value pair kind of event. So to make it easier to mask for this one, we would probably start with a parser and extract all of our key value pairs. If we just set the source here as _raw and leave the destination blank, it will put all these KVPs at just the top level of the event. So that's what we see here. That makes them very easy to work with. One time you may want to use the destination field. You can then put things maybe under a sublittle JSON, like this one. And that can help if you ever wanted to reserialize these fields back into your _raw after your masking. That can just make it easier to select those fields for that step, instead of having to worry about the host or the source or the Cribl breaker, all these other fields that are in the event itself. This just kind of separates. These were the actual event data details that we pulled out, maybe in order to recreate that _raw later or do something like that. For today, however, we're going to keep that just empty, keep this a little simpler. So we're just going to pull them out and show how we can alter or even check some of these values and apply the masking where we want them. So for the first one, we're going to use that is credit card with the card number field, just to verify that this number actually is a credit card. And to show that actually does work, we can copy this detail here over into our advanced editor. We can paste that as our event. And if we go down near the bottom, we'll see this card number. And this is our value, and it does equate right as a is credit card comes back as true. But if we alter this, instead of say 35, we put 12, and we know the credit cards often start with the same prefix, depending on card type, then now it now fails that check, and it doesn't come back as a valid credit card number. And you could do some testing on the events to show that when we applied here at the filter, that's just now making it so our mask function will only get run not just when the card number field exists, but when it also passes that credit card test. And so that can avoid testing random numbers and having to use some CPU cycles. So I do like using that one. If you wanted to, just for the beginning though, you could just do true, and that would apply to any event. It will look at them and then apply here at the apply to fields. So here, card number is the field we're applying this. So looking at the actual match regex, in this case, it's a number. So we can easily use the /d+. And we put a couple of, we make the capture group with the round parentheses so that inside here we can actually reference that. So that's group 1. And again, we just want to take the value that we want to mask. We can show kind of how this is going to work over here in the advanced editor. So for this one, simplest, we just give it the credit card value because that's the field that this regex would be applying to. And because it passes that one, and we see the full match, and we see it creates this group 1, which is why we can reference G1 here. For this particular credit card masking function, we do have to give it an input. And so for this one, we do need that to be a capture group. Well, we did kind of refine this or make sure it's a number. That is useful, especially if you have an open filter at the top, it just being true, because then otherwise it could almost, if any field name or you put the wrong field name in here, then this could maybe apply or just waste some cycles where you don't want it to. But since we've already verified that it's a credit card number, inside here, we could also just use a regex like .plus if you wanted to keep it more simple that way, or if that's something that kind of works for you, and then we'd have the same result. So that's the very basic. If you want to get a little bit more advanced there, just to make sure that it happens to be a number. And for little regex, you could also just use the 0 to 9 kind of character class as well. So the full regex kind of syntax here applies, and we can see that with this input, this would be our expected output. And then with that masking credit card function, when we do save this, we'll now see that our card number does get masked, but does leave those last 4 digits. We could apply a different one if we'd like to, and we'll look at that down here for some just other options that we may apply to a field. So in this case, we're just going to apply when it's true. So basically for all events, it will always hit this one. And we're looking at just the social field. So here we do have a social security number, a 9-digit number down here at the bottom. And for the first one, I am verifying that it happens to be a number, and we're just going to apply the redacted method or masking function, which will change that value to the word redacted. So we do see that here, very simple, right, redacted. Other options, right, repeating things to a certain length. And here again, I've had the capture group enabled so that I could reference that group 1 and make it the same length as my input value. So if it was 9 digits, we're going to make this, 9 digits, but all X's this time instead of the word redacted. And so we see the result. Likewise here with the random string. And for this one, we can use the length of the captured group if we'd like. But this is one that doesn't really require that one. You could also just tell it how long you want it to be. So I've made a random string. We could also just say, give me a random string that's 9 characters. And then we don't need the capture group over here. And so you have lots of flexibility with these different functions, and you can see how you can easily apply them and do some testing to see how the results are going to look for you. And then finally, just we want to make it, say, into an MD5 hash. Then we do pass it the value, and it comes out with a MD5 hash version. So lots of options there. The only other one I was going to highlight, rather than this true, if you have something like this, right, our JSON event, once we've parsed it, if we want to make sure that the field just exists before we even test if it has a certain format, and maybe help to make this more efficient when the social maybe doesn't exist in the event. And this is more just even highlight just how you would approach this more than being needed. You could use something like this one. So _E would reference just the event. So that here is just what we see here with the _raw _time, just our event. And this has_own property is how we check a JSON to see if there's a field name that exists within it. So here with the word social, And if we were to copy this and try in our advanced editor, we can see that because the social does exist in here, I think it was down one, right? Social, then we get a true. Or if we rename this, then it fails and we get a false. So we can see where this has own property item. Something else I just kind of wanted to show here today, and how that can help just to determine or make sure that the field does exist. Because I know a lot of people will probably want to apply that check. And so that's kind of it for the basics. You can see here that when we have it parsed out into a simple format, we could easily kind of reference a field that we want, redact it with a value. We can even redact that if we want with just a set string if you want, right? Like we did with the redacted one, but our own string, if I want to call that blah, I can just do a save and my social value will now just be that specific string. So have fun, kind of play around with that one. I guess actually one last one I'm going to go over would be with the random one, right? We noticed that that was an alphanumeric string, but maybe for something like a social security number, I may want that to actually be a number. Maybe I don't care if it's only 9 characters, but I do maybe want it to be a number. So for something like that one, I did just want to show where we could use this different function. So the math.random, call that, I think, just any value here. So it matches. Then the math.random will create this random number, always with that 0 dot and then a set of numbers here. So if we want to get maybe a certain number of digits, we can start multiplying it, by 10 or 100 and start moving that decimal over a little bit to get to where we want. And then if we only have a certain digits, we don't want the rest, that's where we can use something like maybe the math.rounding to just get rid of the decimal after we've done that. And now here, if I hit enter, we can kind of see it will generate this new value as we go. So that's just one way to make a random number. Just also shows the versatility of this kind of masking, and you have lots of options for your replacement. So if you can be a little bit creative, you can kind of usually find what you're looking for. The other way of doing the same kind of output, instead of using the math.round, we can also use something like the number.parseInt. And this as well will give us an integer and with a bit of precision based on our multiplication here. All right, so with that one, let's take a look at a little more advanced event, where this one was pretty straightforward, everything just in easy KVPs. What if we have maybe nested JSON or something like that one, and how can we reference that down a chain? So that's kind of where part 2 comes in, and let's go take a look at that. So, all right, here for part 2, we're going to go over to this sample file that I've created, and it has 2 basic copies of almost the same event. And if we expand it, we can see here it's a more complicated JSON that has these nested ones. And here, the main difference is in these additional details, where this first one only has one. We'll notice the anomaly details is an array, and it only has one item in that array. And we see here it has a password, or it's something that we would want to redact. We definitely don't want passwords floating around. The difference with the second event was it was the same clone as the first one, but I added a second anomaly details just to show, hey, if we have an array that has multiple values, how would we handle that when we have, say, password not just once in the event, but maybe twice, and we want to make sure that we redact it both times. So there's a couple of different ways to approach this problem. So the first one, again, we're going to start with the parsing of going from _raw and creating that one. In this case, we're going to create the event fields kind of sub or JSON to put all the details into that we're extracting from our raw event. So let's go ahead and enable that one. And here we have those and our kind of chain. So getting down to this password one, it's not as bad when it's all just JSON, but this array kind of does throw a little bit of a wrinkle to get down there. So if we look at our masking function here, and actually before we look at that, let's just try a few things of how we're going to, approach this. So we would need to just reference them in a period. So it'd be event fields, then period, additional info, and then another period to get down to the next level and so on through here. So before we deal with the array, let's maybe just look at this anomaly name as being one that we'd want to change. So to get to that one, it would be event fields or EVT fields dot additional info and then dot anomaly name. And so quite specific. In this case, we know it's a string, but we can also just use that dot plus to match any type of characters that might be in there. If we don't know what the format is, we just always want to change the value, much like we might want with a password where we don't want to get into a complex logic. Just if it has a value, randomize it or mask it for us. So here, if we click save, we can see that was pretty easy. And it created a random string straight away for us. So that's how we can go down the chain of a JSON object to get to a field that we would like, just by putting in that dot delimited kind of format of each of the levels of the JSON, starting with the first one, then a period, then the second one, and then finally down to our value here. But let's see what happens when we try to do that same logic here with an array. So EVT fields dot additional info, anomaly details. And our first instinct here would be, well, we want the 0 record, right? The first one. So let's put in a 0 and then password. But what we find here, when we run that, it doesn't actually change anything, right? That value is the same as it was before. So that didn't work. Well, okay, maybe we don't need the 0. We just put anomaly details, and then we go straight to just the field name that we want. So let's maybe take a look at that. All right, this is kind of what the logic I think many people would run through when working through this kind of situation. And again, man, that failed. I couldn't get down to the password. So how do I do that? That's the syntax I found, was to use a star, because we do allow some wildcards. If you hover over the tooltip, it will let you know support star wildcards. So we can do EVT fields dot additional info, and then anomaly details. And because this one will have the different array items, that's where we're going to use our star. And then for within those, now we're going to go with dot password, being the field name that we actually want to modify. And with that one, once we click save, we now see that it was successful in modifying our password value. So that's how we can deal with arrays. Basically go and put in the array name and then just append a star at the end. And then you can go ahead and reference the actual field name here that you'd like to change. And we know this is only applying to the password because I am using the dot plus regex. So if it was matching other field names, then it would randomize all of them. But because it only randomized our password value, we know that this did correctly follow the path of the field chain here that we were trying to accomplish. Let's also take a look at that second event where there was 2 passwords we wanted to mask. Now that we found out how we get into that level of the object, and we see here as well that it didn't actually apply to this event. Oh, sorry, we're looking at the underscore raw. When I code the actual event fields one, that's where we're going to see that it did actually redact both of our passwords. So again, if we actually want to look at the underscore raw, we can see that the first password started with an AZ #, The second one started with ABC123. And looking at our kind of parsed values for them, our password here was randomized. And this one here as well, it no longer starts with the ABC123. So that was very easy for it to go and find within both of these array objects that it needs to change both of those passwords. So the other approach to do this would be just to leave it as a string, right? Deal with _raw just as it is. Maybe don't parse it. Let's just go look within the event. And I just want to change this portion of that string. And this may work if you have a complicated string, like a web address or something like that you need to break down, and maybe can't parse it into individual key value pairs, like we can with a structured format, like a JSON or a KVP or something like that one. So in this case, we can disable both of those. We're going to look at this masking function instead. So again, we're just looking at any of them. And what we're going to do for our regular expression here is we're actually going to look for the field name. And since we're looking at _raw as the field to apply it to, we're going to include the quotes around it as well. Because within the _raw, we do see this is presented as a double quote, the string password, a double quote, full colon, and then a quote, a value, and a quote. We could also match on the comma, but just in case the password was at the end of maybe a JSON or at the very end of the event, we wouldn't actually have a trailing comma. So we're just going to go from the quote to quotes here. And so because everything that's matched in our match expression is what's going to get replaced, if we look for that quote password, quote, and then our colon here, in this portion, what that regex means is all the characters up until another quote. So not quote plus. And then we use the question mark so it doesn't get too greedy and try to go too far into the event. It'll stop at the first double quote that it finds, which will be the one right here before our comma. And so our replacement value, because like I said, everything that we look at gets replaced. If we were to take this string, I'd actually even just take the full _raw. We can go into the advanced editor here and just take a closer look. So here we see that purple version is what's going to match. And currently we're going to replace it again with the field name. Because we were matching it, it would essentially remove it. So we want to make sure to put that in. And then we want to fill in our masking expression. In this case, I want a random string of alphanumeric characters of the same length as the original password. And then, of course, we need that trailing quote. And then at the end, we see our output is the same. The purple kind of matches. We see the field name still exists. The overall format's the same, but our password has now been redacted for us or randomized. So what would happen if we didn't kind of put that field name back in? We just did our normal just masking. And that's where we see we actually break the format in this case because we removed the field name that we were matching on. So just be aware when you're doing this kind of string replacement here and looking for a field like this, that when you do put in your replacement, you want to make sure that you put that field name back in and you're not inadvertently removing data that you wouldn't want to in the event. All right, so looking at that one, let's take a look at the second one down here. Let's click Save so we can actually apply that and see the change that we get. So for the first one, in here, we see this object, that's the old kind of JSON object, and it's been replaced by this one. So don't get alarmed. This one had the 9 items. This one still has the 9. And it's just representing that in the way the diff works, that we essentially removed the old JSON object and put in a new one. But it does have our randomized password. One interesting thing with this one is when we do look at the second event, we notice here only this one got randomized. The second one still starts with ABC123. Because we're treating the full underscore raw as one big long string, this regular expression only applied once. In order to get it to apply across the entire event in case there's multiple matches, we can click the little flags here, and we see a few options. So whether it's a case-insensitive match or some of these other conditions, the one we would want to use here today is the global. So don't return after the first match. Keep looking through the event to see if there's anything else that matches our regex pattern, and make sure to apply it to everything that matches this pattern here in case it is there multiple times. So we didn't have to worry about that or deal with that with the first approach. By having that star, it found them, the two items within the array. But this time, because it's more of a string, we do need this global option on our regex. And now when I click save, we'll see that it updates both of them. So that was the first event. We scroll down. Now both passwords here have been randomized, and it shows that both were modified. So that's how we can handle that situation. If we do have something like a big string and the field we're replacing or just the condition we're looking at matches multiple times, then we can get into that one. This kind of technique can be super useful if you have something like a key value pair format and you want to remove the entire field, maybe when there's a placeholder value or a blank. So as a final one, I wasn't really planning on it, but let's go and maybe take a look at how we might approach that. So if we maybe look at one of these, so here we have this MEID equals NA, and we also have a reply to kind of NA. So we could use this similar type of underscore raw masking in a similar kind of regex to go and look for those. So the two ways we could maybe do that one would be separate masking rules for each of those fields. I probably should have just kept that one because it'd be easier. So let's put that back in. All right. So if we just hit cancel, I think would also just get us where we want it to be. Yeah. So for this one, the simplest one is really just changing what the field name is. And I guess the format did change a little bit. So MEID, then it's an equal sign. And in this case, it'd be just say NA. And in this case, we just want to remove it. So we're going to replace it with just a blank. I think there is a comma, though, we're going to have to deal with. So as soon as I find the that field in here again, where'd it go? There it is. Yeah, so ideally, we probably should replace just the comma and the space as well. So let's kind of put both of those in here. So if it matches that, which is really just all text, then replace it with a blank, which should effectively just remove it. So we no longer see it. We should go from this update billing kind of quote to this order number field instead. Right, and so we do see that MEID that was in here is no longer there. And we could do a separate one for the reply to here as well. So reply to equals NA, and let's just get rid of that to make the field. Maybe the space could stay, but the comma definitely needs to go. And then we can also redact that field. But since both of these were the same placeholder of NA, we can also be a little more dynamic. So in this case, if we start with, say, not equal sign and plus, and I think here we'll put a space before it first, and we're going to get rid of that trailing space. Then in this case, we're actually putting the capture group around the field name, and Now with our replacement, we can actually replace it, I guess, if we wanted to just remove the value but keep the field. Be this use case here. We could replace it with G1 and then maybe equals double quotes. And I'd put that all in the backticks so that it actually replaces it. Oh, sorry. If we do the backticks, we actually need that there as well. And so in this case, our MEID, and we need to keep our comma in there. You can see from our format. As well as let's put that space back in. So in this case, right, our MEID, we replaced it from being NA over to just blanks, and we also kept the reply to field, but we blanked that one. So the separate lines are useful when we have different field names that we want to match with the NA and replace it here. I think we could also just remove them and remove both of those fields if we do something like this. We don't necessarily need the capture group on that one. Really just saying, anything before the equal sign and then NA and comma, I want to remove that whole chunk. And in this case, I put the space before it since each field name starts with a space and I don't want to kill a comma. And so this was the original one I was thinking of kind of trying to show, where it can dynamically look across kind of the entire one for all of the fields that have the same placeholder of NA. From our input, that's where we could see the credits was one, the reply to was a third one, or a second one, and the MEID here was a third one. So at least those three. And if we look in the output, we no longer see the credits or any of those other two. So very useful here for the masking and different regexes and things you can use for tackling some of these challenges. I hope that was useful. If there's any questions, please let us know. And otherwise, happy masking.
Thanks, Randy. If you want to learn more, you might want to look at our documentation at docs.cribl.io, or take a sandbox for a spin at sandbox.cribl.io. And last, please be a part of the community at community.cribl.io. As always, thank you for watching.